Bien, bonsoir à tous. Je vous propose de commencer ce webinaire dès maintenant. Alors, une fois n'est pas coutume, le webinaire aura lieu en anglais. Donc, je vois mes speakers s'inquiéter et se dire que je ne les avais pas prévenus et que ce serait en français, mais qu'ils ne s'inquiètent pas. On va passer directement à l'anglais. So, welcome to this webinar that will be in English, as I just said, in French, and that will be dedicated to one of the last reports of the European Court of Auditors, published in October 2023, if I'm right. The title of the report is very explicit: Special Report, Public Procurement in the EU, Less Competition for Contracts Awarded for Works, Goods and Services in the 10 years up to 2021. As everybody knows, public procurement accounts for about 14% of the EU GDP. And as we are talking about public money, we would expect public authority to maximize value for money by selecting efficient firms. The task is not easy, knowing that the challenge doesn't stop here. In addition to the primary goal of maximizing value for money, public procurers are equally mandated to follow strategic objectives such as social and environmental consideration, as well as developing small and medium-sized enterprise access to public procurement contracts. Well, this report concludes that we are still far from the objectives concerning competition, concerning SMEs inclusion in public procurement contract, and concerning strategic objectives. And the report also suggests that part of the problem might be the last public procurement directive. And lastly, the report makes some propositions on how to improve things. So I believe the insight of this report to be of significant importance. That's why I'm very happy. I'm delighted to welcome today two speakers that participated to this report. Helga Berger on the one side and Friedman Zippel, both of the European Court of Auditors. So thank you both for being here and to take time to talk about this report and to share with us your report conclusion. Same rules of the game as usual for this webinar. If you want to ask questions to the speakers, you can go through the chat part of the Zoom, and I will pick up questions for the speakers during the discussion time. You might also switch on your mic during the discussion time if you want to ask your question directly. Helga, Friedman, the floor is yours for 30 minutes to present the report. To present the report, but maybe also briefly to present the European Court of Auditors, that is an institution that is not very well known. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Stefan. Dear ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the invitation to present today the result of the European Court of Auditors special report, Public Procurement in the EU, Less Competition for Contracts Awarded for Works, Goods and Services in the 10 years up to 2021. It is a pleasure for me to be here today, and your interest is another example of what I have been experiencing since the publication of the report last year. A warmly welcomed wake-up call, a lot of interest from different stakeholders, and one common message. Yes, something needs to be changed. My name is Helga Berger, and I'm the Austrian member at the European Court of Auditors. And I'm today here together with Friedman Zippel, who is the principal manager responsible for this task. We plan in the next 30 minutes that I shortly start with the introduction about the European Court of Auditors, who we are, what are our responsibilities and tasks, and then diving into the details on public procurement issues. Summarizing a bit the public procurement findings in general, and then focusing in particular on the special report on public procurement in the EU, which we have published last year. I will then hand over to Friedman, who will share some details on data analysis and some insights for France with you. But let's start directly with some words of the European Court of Auditor, the ECA, as we call ourselves. The European Court of Auditor is one of the 7 European institutions, the European financial watchdog. The ECA is the independent external auditor of the European Union, and our mission is governing EU finances. We have to monitor the proper implementation of the EU budget, and we have to ensure sound financial management. We have been set up under the Brussels Treaty in 1975. Our headquarters is in Luxembourg, and around 1,000 auditors are working here. The ECA is led by a collegial body of the 27 members members nominated by the member states. We have to perform our duties in full independence in the general interest of the European Union. We are appointed for 6 years and reappointments are possible. We take all our decisions as a collegial body, all 27 members together, and the audit work itself takes place in 5 chambers, 5 members each chamber. On that slide, you can see the chamber structure of the court. It has grown like the task and the competences of the European Union itself. The first chamber is the Historical Agriculture Chamber, nowadays responsible for natural resources, more and more a green chamber. The second chamber is responsible for cohesion policy, the historical funding for the regions of Europe, and the procurement audit has been an audit of this chamber. You can see my picture in the middle of the slide in chamber 2. The third chamber is auditing internal and external policies, justice, and more security issues as it's becoming of more importance. The fourth chamber is auditing various topics in connection to business environment, from competition, financial market, to banking union and research, till macroeconomic governance of the European Union. The fifth chamber is a horizontal chamber, auditing administration and budget and being responsible for our annual report. This annual report is a perfect bridge to the next subsection. What are the Court of Auditors' tasks and responsibility? The details are set out in the Treaty of the Functioning of the European Union, and the second relevant legal basis is the Financial Regulation. Together, these regulations specify the main task of the European Court of Auditors. We have to carry out audits with the aim to improve the financial management and to report to European citizens on how public funds are used. We fulfill our duties in 2 pillars of audits. One, on compliance and financial issues, to deliver the basis for the discharge procedure at the European level, the statement of assurance. The second pillar is the performance audit pillar, where we publish special reports throughout the whole year, covering issues such as economic competitiveness and cohesion in Europe, climate and resource challenges, security in Europe and European values, and finally, European public finances. You can see on the next slide the allocation of our resources to these pillars. 56% of our resources to fulfill our obligation by the treaty to deliver an external auditor's opinion on the financial statement, our annual report, which we always publish in October each year. 44% of performance audits. But the main topic for today is how procurement issue pops up in our audit work. And for sure, the source of errors in our financial and compliance auditing for the statement of assurance is as well public procurement. We have to deliver audit opinions on the reliability of the financial statement and the legality and regularity of revenue and expenditure. Therefore, we audit the management and control systems in place. And of course, we do some substantial testing of variety of transactions based on a representative sample of the EU budget. And this includes, of course, procurement procedures. For example, research projects, cohesion projects, infrastructure projects, or procurement procedures in one of the EU institutions. And what are these main errors we identify through our audits? It's discriminatory selection criteria or biased technical specification in tendering process. It is artificial splitting of contracts. It's a selection of bidders not complying with selection criteria, incorrect evaluation of tenders, or conflict of interest not identified. But let me highlight that we have seen improvements in the last years due to a new action plan in this area. This action plan has helped to improve member states' administrative capacity and compliance with public procurement procedures in cohesion area, for which area it was set up. Our audits find now fewer procurement errors compared to previous periods. And procurement issues can be, of course, part of a performance audit, our audit on the effective, efficient, and economical use of public money. And the one we have published last year is the reason why I'm here today. Why ECA has selected this audit for its audit program. When you hear public procurement, it sounds very complicated and technical. Some people may even lose interest in it. And exactly about that, companies are complaining. It's the complexity and the lack of transparency, a very worrying development. But it is actually about a huge amount of public money. And above all, it is also a great opportunity for companies, especially small ones, to do business with public authorities. We are talking about 2 trillion public money spent each year by governments, regions, and municipalities. We are talking about approximately 14% of the GDP of the 27 member states. Making public procurement more attractive for companies and fostering competition is crucial for countries to get the best value for such an amount of public money. We are talking about the best value for taxpayers' money. We have included the audit in our annual work program to provide insights in the state of play and to raise awareness for public procurement as a driver for value for money, economic growth, employment, and internal market. We assessed how competition in the internal market evolved between 2011, whether the objective of the reform 2014 have been met, whether Commission's monitoring is effective, and whether Commission and Member States have used available data to identify root causes and took actions to reverse the trend. We explored publicly available data recorded in that and developed the interactive dashboard for data analysis. This link is open to the public, and you can use the dashboard to make direct comparison between countries and sectors. Based on our broad audit work, we concluded that it has been a lost decade for competition in the EU and in its member states. Our analyses show that the level of competition for public tenders has gone down over the last 10 years. Given the multiple challenges and the crisis that countries are facing, we simply cannot afford to lose another decade. Let me go into some details. The trend for the main competition indicators was unsatisfactory in most member states. Single bidding, the main competition indicator, nearly doubled. This means that the number of procedures where there was only one bidder increased by almost 100% in 10 years. It reached a peak in 2021 when for 42% of all orders in Europe, only one company submitted a bid. At the same time, the number of companies submitting tenders almost halved, from around 6 to 3 per procedure. And too many contracts were awarded directly. We are talking about authorities directly approaching one or several companies without issuing a public tender at all. Such direct awards should be the exception. In fact, they were used much more generously. 16% of the contracts above the EU threshold were awarded directly in 2021. 23 out of 27 member states lie above the 10% red flag. These 3 indicators show that competition has faded away in the last decade. At the same time, cross-border contract awards remained low. This raises doubts about the effectiveness of the EU single market. And let me highlight that we identified significant differences between the member states, regions, and economic sectors. A clear signal that contracting awarded authorities take a diverse approach to their procurement practices. Coming to the second main conclusion. Of course, you know that in 2014, the EU launched a reform of public procurement. The main goal was to make public procurement simpler, easier, more attractive for small companies, and to use public procurement for strategic political goals. We assessed in this audit the impact of the reform, whether it was a success. Unfortunately, the various goals were not yet achieved. The reform has not led to any significant improvement to make public procurement more attractive. Both bidders and contracting authorities still perceive the process cumbersome and the administrative burden high. The impact of the digitalization initiative as the European Single Procurement Document, or the e-form, has yet to be seen. The red tape was not cut. On the contrary, the average duration of public procurement has increased by 50% since 2011, from 63 days in 2011 to 96 days in 2021. And the share of SME contract has not increased overall. The strategic procurement, the promotion of green, social, and innovative public procurement had a limited impact at best. Contracts awarded still in favor of the lowest bid, and transparency is still a challenge. We still have an unsatisfactory publication rate, and you can't see an improvement over time. Let us come to the third main conclusion. The Commission could use available data better to improve the situation. We identified several shortcomings in Commission's monitoring tool. The national monitoring reports lack information on the competitive situation in the member states. That data is not yet sufficiently complete and accurate. We are missing values. Collected data is not always correct, and the agreement on a unique identifier is still pending. The existing online scoreboard of the Commission only provides limited content and does not allow for a proper trend analysis. Relevant indicators are missing. The scoreboard does not show regional or sectoral differences, cross-border data, or strategic procurement issues. The reporting functions are not state-of-the-art, and methodological changes were not disclosed, but improvements are promised. Coming to the last but very important point, both the Commission and the member states are focusing on compliance and not on performance, and therefore not on competition. Commission and member states focus on complying with the rules and avoiding legal challenges. Commission mainly focus on the timely transposition of the EU directives into national law and the correct application of the rules. Performance and competition in procurement were not at the center of attention. We found only little awareness of the problem and no systematic approach to address it. Available data was not systematically analyzed and used for identifying the root causes. Actually, only few coordinated actions to reduce the obstacles to competition were carried out, and they were launched not in a coordinated manner. Clear results. Maybe some insights are interesting, and that's the moment where I now hand over to Friedemann.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Berger. Good evening, everybody. You received already a rich amount of information, I would say, during the last minutes, and I will try to illustrate and visualize a little bit what Mrs. Berger just said on the basis of the figures that we presented in our report. So if we start with single bidding is a competition indicator, the main competition indicator, I would say, that we use to measure competition in public procurement. And as Mrs. Berger said, and you can see here in figure 6 of the report that we published, the rate of single bidding increased from 23.5% to 41.8% within a 10 years period. Why is single bidding critical? Because, of course, if a contracting authority receives only one bid, then it has the opportunity to either accept this one bid or to leave it, so there is no guarantee for any competition, or in fact, there is no competitive situation. In line with this trend is that the average number of bidders halved between 2011 and 2021 from 5.7 bidders to 3.2 bidders. The situation is not homogeneous amongst EU member states. At the end of 2021, only 3 member states, Finland, Malta, and Sweden, were below the red flag threshold of 20% set by the Commission, whereas 3 member states were even above 50% of single bidding rate, with Slovenia as the last student in class with a single bidding rate of 70%. And this, of course, cannot be satisfactory. But as I said, even if overall the trend increased, the situation is not homogeneous amongst member states, so further analysis is needed at member state level. If we move on and we look at single bidding at the level of business sectors or economic sectors, we can see that single bidding increased for all the economic sectors that we looked at. And for 7 out of the 10 sectors that we defined, it even doubled or almost doubled during the 10 years period. I point at construction, for instance, where it increased from 7 to 14%, or engineering, where it increased from 9 to 18%, or sewage services, for instance, where we had an increase from 14 to 30%. So also when we look at the economic sectors overall, we have an increase, although there are, of course, differences between the different sectors that need to be analyzed. If you move on and look at the second important competition indicator that we looked at, this is the no call for bids indicator. No call for bids means that a contract is awarded without having published a call for tenders, and this, according to EU and also national, in the meantime, of course, legislation, is only allowed in exceptional circumstances. For instance, in cases where there was a call for tender, but no bids were sent in, or in case of natural disasters. The situation here, EU overall, remained relatively stable or almost fully stable over the 10 years period at around 16% of all procedures. The best member states that we identified were Greece, with a single bidding rate of only 3.1%, and also Malta, Sweden, Slovakia, and Finland. Worse performing member states were Cyprus, Romania, and Austria, with Cyprus at the very end of the performance range, with 42% of all procedures published without a call for tender. And this, of course, also is an alarming signal. If you move on and look again at the economic sectors, then we can see that the situation is not homogeneous across sectors. Better performing sectors were engineering and financial services, where we had a decrease in the no call for bids rate. A sector with an alarming increase was energy, for instance, where the no call for bids rate increased from 16 to 29%. So we can conclude also here that a more detailed analysis at the level of the economic sectors is necessary and needed. In order to get an idea of the functioning of the internal market in respect of public procurement, we looked at cross-border exchanges. And also here we have seen that almost nothing changed over the 10 years period, as it was the case for the no call for bids indicator. And direct cross-border exchanges remained at the level of about 5% of all public procurement procedures over the 10 years period, which of course is not a lot. The situation, as you can see from this figure, again, is not homogeneous amongst member states. Interesting to say that those countries that are used to work in different languages on a daily basis, for reasons of their geographical location, or countries that do business with neighbor states that speak the same language, perform best. So if you look at Belgium, for instance, we have 3 official languages. If you look at Luxembourg, we have 3 official languages. If you look at Ireland, they, of course, mainly do business with the UK. So the language barrier still seems to be a very relevant one when it comes to understanding reasons behind limited direct cross-border exchanges. I need to add here that on the basis of the data that is available, we only could look at direct cross-border exchanges. So really at exchanges between companies registered in different member states. If, for instance, we have a headquarter company in one member state and a subsidiary company in another member state, and the subsidiary company got a contract from a public authority of this member state, we could not identify this as a cross-border exchange because according to TED data, this would be shown as a contract between a national company and a national contracting authority. So the 5% does not show the entire truth. Most likely, it's only about direct cross-border exchange, but that was the best that we could do on the basis of the data that is available. We move on, look at SME participation. SME participation, to increase it, was a dedicated objective of the 2014 reform. However, on the basis of the data that we have seen, the situation remained rather stable and there's no clear increase in SME participation identifiable on the basis of the data available. We could see some good examples like Austria, for instance, where we had an increase in the number of SME contractors participating and the number of SME bids. We also saw countries where this was not the case, but we saw the contrary trend. So also here the situation is not homogeneous, and the different member states have to look at their specific national situations and circumstances if they want to continue the analysis, which we are very much in favor of course. Then we move on and look at strategic procurement. Strategic procurement means that you integrate in your award criteria strategic policy objectives like green, like social, like gender. For instance, on the basis of TED data, we could not measure the uptake of strategic procurement by contracting authorities, so we had to go for an indirect measurement. And we looked at the procedures that have price as the main or only award criteria. And what we found is that overall, EU-wide, price is still the most important award criteria, and that the uptake of strategic procurement is very small. For 8 EU member states, we even have seen that price still makes for 80% of all contracts the one and only award criterion, which of course is in contradiction to the idea of promoting strategic procurement. This is what I wanted to present in relation to EU overall results. As we were invited kindly by the Sorbonne Business School, we also would like to make a little reference to the figures from France. So we do the same exercise again for France now very quickly. So if you look at single bidding in France, the single bidding rate more than doubled from 14.9% in 2011 to 23.7% in 2021. Nevertheless, this is still the 5th best score amongst the EU 27 in 2021 and still very close to the Commission's red flag threshold of 20%, and it is far below the 41.8% average in the EU. So in terms of single bidding, France is still performing relatively well. The average number of bidders decreased from 5.3 in 2011 to 3.5 in 2021, which is in line with the EU 27 trend. A word on no calls for bids. So here France is the 8th best performer within the EU. The proportion of no call for bids decreased from 15.3% in 2011 to 12.1% in 2021. And with that, France is better than EU 27 average, which is, as I said already, 15.9%, and is still slightly above the Commission, but is still slightly above the Commission 10% red flag threshold. How about SME participation? The SME participation indicators show for France that the number of SME contractors participating in public procurement procedures decreased slightly from 47.3% in 2016. That was the first moment in time when data and SME participation became available, to 42.7% in 2020. And the share of SME bids slightly increased from 67.4% in 2016 to 69.5% in 2020. Now we move on and talk about direct cross-border exchange. And sadly to say, here France is clearly the country with the smallest extent of direct cross-border awards. I leave it to you to analyze the reasons for that at the later stage, but indeed, with 1% direct cross-border awards, France ranks lowest in the EU 27 and of course below the EU 27 5% average. Still a word on strategic procurement in France. Price accounts in France for around 10%, or the price criterion as the main or only award criterion accounts for only 10% of all procedures. With this, France is a very good example. Indeed, although the share increased from 4% in 2011 to 10% in 2021, despite this increase, France is still the second best performer and far below the Commission red flag threshold of 80%. And this is what we confirmed or discussed already in preparation of this webinar today, that in France, for the French contracting authority, indeed, at least meet criteria play an important role when it comes to the award of public contracts. I think it's enough about figures now. That was challenging, I'm sure, to follow all the percentages and all the numbers presented. I think it's time to move on and to speak about the recommendations of the report. So we issued 4 recommendations to the European Commission, and in a way, this is the outcome of all the performance audits that we do, that we issue recommendations, that we discuss with the Commission, and that the European Commission then has to implement in the years to come. So we asked the Commission to clarify and prioritize public procurement objectives, because the directive mentions several of them and they are not necessarily complementary, but partly maybe even conflicting. So we call the Commission to clarify and prioritize public procurement objectives. We asked the Commission to address shortcomings of public procurement data, because if you want to define mitigating actions, corrective actions, you need an informed basis. And for this enormous amount of public procurement procedures, it is important to collect the data to understand what's going on the ground, what is the reason for limited competition. We identified, as you can see it in our report, considerable weaknesses in the data. So the Commission, in cooperation with the member states, needs to do something about the completeness, reliability, and meaning of public procurement data, so that it can prepare a good analysis of root causes to limited competition in public procurement. And this nicely leads us to the 4th and last recommendation. We asked the Commission to continue the analysis, the root cause analysis, and put forward measures to overcome key obstacles to competition and promote best practice in the EU. Our audit report is just a starting point, if you like. The Commission from there needs to go now a further mile and continue the analysis of underlying reasons and then define mitigating actions. And we thought that an EU-wide action plan could be an appropriate means to do that. Happy to say that the Commission fully accepted all our recommendations. We had a very constructive cooperation with the European Commission in the context of this audit, which is not always the case. But here we really have seen that the Commission was open to listen to our results and to discuss the recommendations. And we are looking forward to follow up our audit recommendations and their implementation by the European Commission in about 3 years' time. But with that, I thank you for your attention so far and hand over again to Mrs. Berger for final words.
Thank you. Yes, let me shortly conclude. I think the data, the facts, the findings show you that much still needs to be done to make public procurement more attractive, to turn the tide and to boost competition. We cannot afford to lose another decade. Together, we have to work to make public procurement more attractive to companies, as this is the best way to increase the value of public funds. This is the common goal for public buyers and bidders. Our report was a wake-up call at EU level, and first impact is already visible. The Commission started several initiatives to follow up the report. procurement dialogue with member states, analysis of the legislative framework, exchange of best practices, new version of EU forms, the new platform PPDS, and the buyers platform to help member states. These are the first steps to boost the competition, and the outcome remains to be seen. We thank you now for the attention so far, and we are happy to reply any questions you might have after all these details now. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this presentation and for presenting those striking results in your report. You call this a wake-up call for the European Commission. I believe this is quite again striking results, and maybe before to discuss the results in details or to ask you some questions about the main results, I would like to open the discussion, and I would like to start by referencing your morning presentation at the Council of European Union. I went to the agenda of the Council of the European Union, and I saw that you were supposed, and probably you did it, you presented your report this morning. And I was wondering how it has been welcome, and if there is any information you can give us about maybe new directives or new rules of the game that will be developed in the next coming months or coming years at the EU level.
Yes, thank you, Stefan. Yes, indeed, our day started quite early at 10 o'clock in the morning in Brussels with this working group where we have presented our results as well. And it was overall a very positive and constructive debate. Even Commission already agree with us that it was a wake-up call, the report. It was a good debate on the implementation of the recommendation. It was mainly focused on the recommendation itself. Commission is quite clear that things needs to be changed. They really considering coming back with a new legislative initiative. There was an overall agreement that some analysis, some further analysis, in-depth analysis of the root causes of the development are needed, because we have done this audit mainly for the Commission and for 6 member states, as we couldn't cover all 27, but this is necessary. And as Friedemann mentioned, there is not one reason for the development, but it's the diversity of reasons, and we can maybe go into the details later on. And there is not a homogeneous development, so this further analysis, root cause analysis are needed. The member states very much appreciated the report as well. We discussed mainly the issue of fragmentation of the legal framework, which has, I think, added complexity in the last years. We have discussed the issue of strategic procurement and whether it's really the right way to do it as it has been done. I think there was common sense that changing the situation, improving the situation and boost competition needs to be a joint exercise. And yes, member states are ready to support the Commission's initiative in that direction as well. So overall, positive day, and yes.
So maybe I've got another question. I'm also curious about the factors contributing to the main findings of the report. As you say, you've got some results, especially the competition is going down. You've got striking results and huge change over the period, over 10 years. You've got some countries where, I mean, the percentage of direct contract award or a contract award with only one bidder changed a lot those last 10 years, or between 2011 and 2021. But we don't really know what are the roots or the reasons for such change. And you got some surprising results. I mean, I was just looking at, for example, your graphics concerning the evolution of direct award without any call for bids. Greece is first. Austria is at the very, not very last, but nearly one of the very last countries. That comes like a surprise. I mean, so I was wondering what are the reasons you might have in mind explaining this? Do do you have in mind the fact that you might have a concentration of the market, as it is mentioned in the report, in some part of the report? Is it also some issues concerning competition cartels that might develop in some countries or in some specific sectors? Or might it be some other reasons? I was wondering if, and this is one question that is in the chat part of the Zoom, this is more or less the same that I'm raising now. I mean, is there a list of further studies, investigation that might be launched in order to have some explanation about these striking results concerning competition?
I mean, at the end, there's a multitude of factors, as you already mentioned it, and you referred to direct award. I mean, direct award is easily connected in our thinking with corruption and fraud and bribing. So you give the contract to the company that you want for whatever reason without having competition.
Yeah.
But the direct award also can be the consequence of a published call for tender where you did everything right and you just did not receive any single bid. So then the legislation allows you to go for a direct award, to find directly the company that provides you the service. So two totally different reasons that lead to the same result, direct award. So it's difficult to say. There are other factors like administrative burden. Administrative burden is one of the main reasons that is reported by companies, also by contracting authorities that we interviewed, also by experts to competition public procurement. Public contracts simply seem to be not attractive enough to economic operators. If business is possible private to private, it's preferential in comparison to public to private or private to public business, because private to public, public to private business is considered to be so cumbersome, so administratively heavy. An argument that was also brought forward was that communication is so restricted in public procurement procedures. If you do private to private business, you sit together, you talk, you negotiate, you agree on the terms. So it's more easy to communicate and to find through communication a win-win situation. Of course, in public procurement, it's so very much important that you have transparency and that you ensure equal rights to everybody who is interested in the contract. So that imposes restrictions to communication. These are reasons. Perception of fraud and corruption. The simple perception that people often think that, well, in the public sector, it's clear from the beginning who will get the contract, is also a reason that was brought forward for a limited unattractiveness of public contracts. The length of procedure, all these are factors. Of course, there are also external factors. Mm-hmm. Like the overall economic environment. When the economy is booming, public contracts might be not so necessary for companies to make good business. When the economy goes down, of course, then public contracts might become more interesting again because there is not so much public demand. So there are many different reasons, and what is really important, and this is what we say in our report, is that the different member states together with the Commission, or even the different regions, because there are also important regional differences, analyze the gaps and find the gaps that exist in their region and then take targeted action. So there is no one fits all solution that we could suggest. It really needs region by region, economic sector by economic sector analysis. And last but not least, administrative capacity of both the contracting authorities, but also the interested companies is very, very important to understand the rules and also to understand the flexibility that the rules provide, and that often is not known, as it is, for instance, the case for this communication and negotiation possibilities in the context of published tenders.
You were mentioning the relationship with the European Commission, the fact that they welcomed this report well, and they were very interested by the result. In fact, this report, as you said, has been published last year. I believe it was in September. I'm not sure about the exact date, but I believe this is the case. And I thought organizing these webinars that we were a little bit late and we could have invited you before and so on, but no later than last Friday, there was another webinar with some people from the European Commission discussing about this report. And they were mentioning the fact that the results are quite interesting, but they are not so sure about what to think about it because of the poor quality of the data. And that's exactly, also you mentioned this in the report, and this is one of your main recommendations. I mean, the TED data are not so reliable by the end of the day. So I would like to know what you think about this and what is your feeling about this. Do you feel comfortable with your result and with the quality of the data? Because once again, we see huge change in some countries like Croatia in the right direction, if I remember well. But sometimes you've got also huge change in the other direction in some countries, and it might come also from the fact that the data are not completely reliable.
Maybe I start and Friedemann adds something. I think the data show such a clear trend that I'm not so concerned about the quality data. If it would be closer and the development would not be that clear, you could maybe discuss a bit more. But we have taken what is there. That's the only thing we can do. And overall, I think there's an absolute agreement that it was good that we have done this analysis, that we have shown the results. And we ourselves were quite clear in the recommendations. On this recommendation 4, as I already mentioned, we have clearly addressed the need that additional analysis of the root causes are needed before you take any legal initiatives. And that's how we tackle it. You concretely mentioned Croatia. Croatia was one of the member states we have selected for our audit, where we had interviews as well. And I think one of the main reasons is that exactly in these days, which were included in the analysis, Croatia joined the European Union. So you can see the positive impact from the European rules as well. And that's what I think we jointly agreed with Croatia as well. So the trend is clear. There needs something to be done. What was a bit even more surprising for me, that there was not more awareness of this development. Why no other institutions, why Commission has not used the data to deliver this analysis, because they could have done it. And so I think whatever Commission is now bringing in on arguments, I see clear the need that steps are taken, and maybe really these analyses come here and there to different results. But being responsible member for the audit, I would have expected more steps taken at European and national level, and to deliver as well positive results, best practices, and so on. But overall, we have seen this focus on compliance, avoiding any legal challenges for the procedures, not making a mistake, because that seems to be the biggest problem, but not enough awareness that best value for money, that efficient procedures and effective procedures, and awarding contracts to the best bidders is sometimes at least the same important as it is to comply with the rules. And this goes for the Commission, this goes for the member states. So I think overall, yes, enough assurance that we can say what we are saying.
Yeah,
I think it's
maybe to continue on this topic, not the quality of the data, but what you just mentioned, the strategic objectives of public procurement. I mean, it also came as a surprise to see that there was no effect of the new European directives concerning the use of the public procurement as strategic objectives, because the European directives are already pushing for this, permitting to use many criteria during call for bids and so on. And especially from France, as you said, France is a specific case compared to other European countries where more than 90% of the contracts are awarded using other criteria than price, not only price. And as you may know, in France, we've got a new law that has been voted in August 2021, the climate law, that will make mandatory for every public procurement contract, whatever the amount, the use of environmental criteria during the call for bids. So there will be an obligation not to use only the price to select the bidders. So very soon we will be at 100%. And that's true that France seems to be an exception compared to the other European countries. So that's true that it came as a surprise in your report. And one of the reasons you just mentioned is maybe because public authorities, public procurers that can be at the national level or at the local level want to comply with the rule and not to make any mistake during the call for bid or the award procedures using some criteria that might be not so precisely defined in the European directive. I don't know, what is your feeling about this?
I mean, on the strategic procurement, there's no straightforward answer. With our report, we put figures on the table on competition in the EU and indirectly also on the uptake of strategic procurement. And what we have seen from the Commission, but also today at the Council, is that more or less people said, oh, wow, yes, finally, now we have it on paper, because we felt it and we saw it, that there is not enough competition. We just didn't have the figures and we had no measure for it. Now, if you feel that competition is weak and that it is difficult to get as a public authority the services, the works that you want, the incentive to add additional conditions like social, like gender, like green, like whatever is very low, because then the likelihood that you get your services, that you get the works you need, is further decreasing. So if competition is weak anyway and you add additional conditions, this is of course not very much attractive, neither to the contracting authorities nor to the bidders. And I think that this is the main reason for this limited uptake of strategic procurement considerations.
Yeah. So it will be
then,
interesting.
of course, as you mentioned it, there comes the sectoral legislation that, in addition, complementing the acquis, more and more imposes this kind of conditions, which further complicates the legal framework that we have for public procurement, and not necessarily makes the whole situation more attractive.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is not that I'm against strategic public procurement, not at all. We just need to keep in mind the consequences of adding conditions to public procurement procedures.
Yeah. But as you said, the European Commission is not looking for performance. So that they don't put that at the top of the agenda. And France will be a kind of benchmark. We will see that as soon as it will be mandatory in every public procurement contract to add some green criteria and social criteria, we will see if the competition is going down even more in the next coming years. So it could be we could be a benchmark, and yeah, maybe not an example to follow. We will see in the next future. Maybe just to conclude the discussion, and then I will open the question to the floor, and everybody will be able to open their mic if they want to ask a question directly. Now you can't. Everything is closed, but I will open this for the floor. I would like to conclude by asking you, so you've got 4 main propositions in your report, and let's say that the European Commission will not select the 4, but will focus on one. What would be the main recommendation you would like to defend tonight in this report? What is the most important recommendation from your point of view?
I would say they are of equal importance, of course, but I think the 4th recommendation with this root cause analysis and setting up the action plan is for me the main important one, because at the end, it leads as well to the implementation of the other 3 recommendations. So if they start with the first one, I think they are pretty soon convinced that they need to do something with the data quality, with the monitoring, and they need to take a decision how they really prioritize and focus on some objective, and to decide what is the best instrument to make some policy. So if they start with the 4th one, the others will come.
Friedman, do you agree? Maybe you might be not on the same line.
Yeah,
I mean,
Yes, I agree. But I also see data are interlinked. So of course, in order to define actions, you also need to improve the data to do a good analysis. So they are interlinked.
Yeah.
And I think the first statement is the one that I would support most, that they are more equally important than that there should be one that really needs to be prioritized. But of course, the last one is the one where then we bring action on the ground. I mean, the recommendations before more or less bring us in a situation to then define an action plan and implement action that can remedy the situation.
Okay. Thank you very much. As an economist, we would say that we need one instrument for one objective. And right now, there are many, many objectives that are followed by the public procurement contracts at the EU level. So maybe that's an issue. But I don't want to ask other questions about the report. I will open to the floor. So if somebody wants to open its mic and to ask a question, this is the time to do it. One question, François, you want to ask a question? I see that you open your mic.
Yes, thank you, Stefan. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Perfectly well.
Okay, thanks for the presentation and thank you for the report of the European Court of Auditors. I think it's been a good study, included for lawyers. So I'm professor of law and at the head of a chair on public contract law. So why I think it's important first is to mention the question of data. I've been working on access for SMEs to public procurement and look for data, and I realized that in France, throughout the years, the method of collecting data has changed, which might explain the figures that you have, which shows a decrease in terms of access to SMEs. So there is really a work to be done on how to collect data. Second, I think it's very important what Stefan just said. Well, maybe not just one instrument for one objective, because of course there's already this mixture in the law, in the European directives. But I had a question, I mean, and I do agree that there can be conflicting objectives. For example, access to SMEs, if it were to work, of course, that has an effect on cross-border, because obviously everybody would feel that if you put some incentive on access to SMEs, that would favor local firms. So, but in terms of prioritizing the objectives, I was wondering, I mean, I'm quite in favor of it, but I was wondering how to translate it into the text, or how do you think that it could be done? Because prioritizing is not really a legal term, so I'm wondering what would be the tools to be used to this regard. So I would have many questions, but maybe I will just stick to this one and see if other people want to ask questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan. Yes, I think that exactly what you mentioned, the SME case is a perfect example to explain as well the conflicting objectives. For example, if you look at the divisions of lots, it's for me a perfect instrument as an Austrian for easier access for SMEs. But with the market situation in other member states, is it everywhere the same? Maybe if you have two small lots, some companies are no longer interested in this tender process because it's too small. So there is so often a pro or con, but it just shows this example that for me there are conflicting objectives in the 2014 reform. And the other point, what we wanted to address with one of our recommendations, where we asked for a focus and the prioritization of objective, was if you have too many objectives and you do not measure them, then it's no surprise that that nobody cares about the impact of the reform and the legislative changes, because you should really know why you change the rules and then have clear indicators to measure it. But in the example of strategic procurement, nobody cares about it. It's implemented here and there, but it does not play a role in Commission's monitoring tool, in the scoreboard. And that's how it not should be. That's why we are saying, discuss the different objectives, agree on the most important ones, prioritize them, and then measure them. And then you have really the impact as well. And then you can take the necessary steps if you're not going in the right direction. That's why I think data quality and using the data later on for measuring the impact of changes is so keen. And that's why I think this first recommendation exactly addresses this link of data and then the use of data for measuring the impact. Thank you.
Somebody else want to ask a question, or I can pick up a question in the chat part of the Zoom, waiting for somebody to open his mic. So there is one question that is linked to the question to the discussion we had about SMEs access to public procurement, and the fact that, for example, you can use lots in order to give incentives for SMEs to apply and to bid for public procurement contracts. I remember that when we discussed about the new European directive in 2015, after it has been voted at the European Parliament, we were also discussing a lot about simplification of procedures and the fact that you will see electronic procurement developed. And we were talking about, I don't know to say that in English, but to look at the website to say it in English. We were also discussing about the European single procurement document that would help all the SMEs to make some bids. So what is your explanation, or do you have any information about why it seems it did not work so well? I mean, because you mentioned in the report that we did not see real simplification, and maybe the reverse in the last years.
I mean, the ESPD is a relatively new tool, I would say. So it's not surprising that there are no important effects that materialized yet. I think it is a simplification, yes, and with that, it is a step in the good direction. Nevertheless, the complexity of the rules still remains immense. And if you talk about the rules, we have the European rules, we have national rules complementing the European rules, then we often have regional rules complementing the national and the EU rules, and often we even have local rules that complement the regional and the national and the European rules. So it's nice to have the ESPD, but still the framework is extremely complex and challenging for small and medium sized enterprises to deal with. And administrative capacity in this respect, of course, clearly is an issue. On the other hand, it's also difficult to ask SMEs to have a group of 3, 4, 5 public procurement experts employed that know the rules and how to apply them. Then, of course, there are also markets that are dominated by big players like energy, for instance. For those markets, of course, entry for SMEs by definition is very difficult. Again, there are no easy answers, but I think the main burden, the main handicap or obstacle to SMEs is indeed this complexity of rules and administrative procedures that have to be considered. And then it's also, of course, I mean, it sounds like a bad excuse that the rules are complex, but if you want to really respect them and fill all the papers and submit all the information, it takes a lot of time and it costs a lot of money, and you can't know whether you have a realistic chance to get the contract or not.
Yeah.
So it's not easy for small and medium-sized enterprises.
Maybe I can add on the EPDS. It's quite symptomatic, these findings on the EPDS we have in the report, because the project started and at the beginning it was not perfect. In German, I would say there were some Kinderkrankheiten, which means that in the process you could improve it, but it has not been done. And the uptake was not as it should be. But Commission have not analyzed the reasons for it, but it has lost a bit the appetite for it and stopped the initiative, stopped the advice for the member states to implement it in a proper way. That's why it has not been taken at the end. The same with e-forms. E-forms is only mandatory since the last November, but the problem was that Commission has proposed some legal changes the last weeks before the mandatory implementation date. So the uptake was again not as it should be. But this just shows for me that not enough is invested in this analysis of why not, and what works well, what does not work well, and what is always the why. What is the reason behind it? And I think this shows again that this homework needs to be done.
Maybe just one question before to give a chance for François to ask another question. Following what you said a few minutes ago, Elga, you were talking about the fact that we need to have better data in order to follow objectives and to be able to measure objectives and so on. That's true that we had already some seminars concerning the TED data and the data that are available to study public procurement efficiency and so on. And very often we conclude that those data are not perfect, very far from perfect. Pierre-Henri is connected and already discussed about this with us in a former webinar. And I was wondering, I thought it was a French specialty to ask for companies and public authorities to give information without any control, without any penalty. And at the end, you do not have good data. I don't know about the TED data, but you've got the answer probably. I don't have the answer. I thought it was mandatory, or especially for some kind of data, looking at the last European Directive 2014, you are obliged to publish information concerning maybe not contract award, I don't know, but for sure for contract modification, you are obliged to do it. And we still see that you've got some countries that are not doing the job. And we are in 2024. So it comes as a surprise that there is no control and no penalty to be sure that the quality of the data is accurate for many European countries. Do you have some answers? See, I don't know.
I would have two answers. The quality of the data comes always with the use of the data. So if there is not enough interest in the use of the data, and this is not at enough, there is not awareness of the problem, I think if nobody cares about it, it's not improving. That's one point, and I think that's what we have seen. Even if it's mandatory, if no one goes back and checks the data, it's the problem. The other problem I think we have clearly identified is that data quality could, and the possibility of analyzing the data could easily be improved if there would be an agreement on the unique identifier. Because if you have the data on the unique identifier, you could do much more proper analysis. For example, cross-border, Friedemann mentioned, if you have this unique identifier included in the mandatory field, much is easier. And the administrative burden for that is not much higher. It's even sometimes, if you use data from different registers, it's even easier. But this has not been done. And it's just all together. If you look at our report, we have examples included of 9,909,999 euros, which is obviously just not really a right data. But if nobody cares about it, that's the result, and that's what we have seen in the audit. I think the openness to the openness by the Commission to really do something in this data part and making more fields mandatory, this appetite I haven't seen so far. On that recommendation, Commission is for me still quite much on the break.
Yeah, that's a pity from my point of view, especially for people like me that are using data. And as an academic, I would like to have more accurate data to make some studies on public procurement efficiency. François, you wanted to follow on your question or to ask a new question? I don't know.
Yeah, well, both. Thank you. Just something about the methods, not about the data. I leave that to the economists, although I'm interested in. But in terms of methods, what I've been experienced at the chair that I created in 2020 is that through on-the-field research, which are interviews and online polls on the way public procurement is applied, we are quite surprised sometimes by the answers from the practitioners about how to use or not use public procurement rules. For example, recently, talking about contract modifications, we used TED to analyze the poor score of France compared to others in terms of contract modification notices at the TED. For example, it's 5 times less than Spain, 20 times less than Germany throughout the 10 last years. So we were quite surprised and started to look for explanations through the interviews and the online polls where around 200 people answered. So there were kind of red tape reasons, such as we've already got enough to do at the prior stage, and sometimes we just forget to do it at the later stage to publish a contract modification notice, because we're working on the performance of the contract, and that's something secondary. But there was the main reason that came out was that in France, we have a lot of possibilities for third parties to challenge contract modifications. So we'd rather, for legal certainty, do not publish, although we know that it's compulsory, but there's no fines. I think in Austria, there are fines if you don't publish contract notice for modification. It's not the case in France. So we prefer taking the risk of some kind of legal uncertainty, which is theoretical because nobody knows about the contract modification because there's not published contract notice published. So just one example in terms of method, I think it's very interesting. And I was wondering whether at the European Court of Auditors, there's something that you've been using like that, some kind of on-the-field research to know the reasons, because you might think of some reasons and discover that there are other reasons going on. So it was just a question of method. Thank you.
I mean, what I can say is that in order to make the data usable and comparable, we did together with scientists, data experts in the field of public procurement, quite some data cleaning. So for instance, some of the member states report in TED also below threshold procedures. Some don't. As long as you have both in the basket, you cannot compare the figures. So what we did was to take out all the below threshold procedures in order to make the figures comparable for the member state, because for the below threshold procedures, there is no obligation to publish in TED. Or what we also did was to search for abnormal values, as Mrs. Berger already explained, with the 9.9999 million euros contract on adult comics, whatever that means. We searched for abnormal values and recordings to clean the data. We looked for double recordings and tried to eliminate double recordings. And also an important step that we did was to eliminate framework contracts as such, and to only include the contracts, the specific contracts that are then really concluded under the framework contracts, but not the framework contracts as such. And that already made a difference. So yes, care is asked when we deal with data, and we did quite some considerable data cleaning. Now, penalties from the Commission, we discussed that, of course, with the Commission, and the Commission said, listen, under the directive, we have no penalties that we could apply. The directive does not foresee that. So it's not so easy for the Commission to say, okay, member state X does not record the data adequately, we apply a 1 million penalty. The Commission explained that they have no tool for that. What they did, and what indeed led to a considerable improvement of mandatory data, is to work more and more with embedded controls, embedded input controls, for instance. But they can only do that for the mandatory data, not for the voluntary data. And there are data that are extremely important, like, for instance, the unique identifier for economic operators. And believe it or not, this is a voluntary field, and that is not a mandatory one. Because member states, when the directive was discussed, negotiated, were hesitant to accept the unique identifier as a mandatory field. And then, of course, yes, we also have the effect, and you are perfectly right, pointing to it, for contract modifications, an embedded control does not help you, because you decide to either record the contract modification or not to record it. And if you do not record it as a member state, how can the Commission catch it then? So I only can confirm what you said. If you deal with data and if you analyze data, be aware of the limitations and try to address them in your approach.
Okay. Is there any other question before we close the webinar? Seems to be good for everybody. No other questions. So thank you again very much for your presentation and the interaction tonight. I retain that this is a wake-up report, so I hope the European Commission will wake up and will try to improve the quality of the data, and will make some studies to understand what's going on behind your results. Maybe also I would like to stress before the end of the webinar, you already said it, but in passing, that you've got online this dashboard that is available for everybody to look at the data in details and some the data in specific countries, specific sectors. So you can go on the website of the European Court of Auditors, and the website dedicated to the report to everybody, and look at this dashboard that is quite interesting to see what's going on in some specific sectors, in some specific countries, and so on. Thanks a lot. Let's stay in touch if you want to explore more in details with François and with some other economist, the specific results you obtain in your report. And once again, thank you very much. As usual, the webinar has been recorded and will be available online for everybody that is interested to see it again, or for everybody that we are not able to stay during the whole webinar. See you next week for our next webinar that will be in French, and that will be dedicated to how to boost investment in Africa through public-private partnerships or through some other kind of instrument. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Stefan, from our side, and thank you for the interest and for the initiative to organize it. Thank you. All the best.
Thank you very much. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.